Guys, we need to talk. I've been thinking, and oh god, how do I say this? You know what? I'm just gonna come out and say it. Movie games may not be as bad as you remember. So video games based on movies have been around for pretty much as long as video games as a whole, with the earliest movie game that I could find being the 1976 arcade game Death Race, based on the movie Death Race 2000. Now, the concept makes a ton of sense. Take a movie with an established name, make a game based on that license. The advertising pretty much writes itself. Now, because these types of games are normally just seen as a cash grab, they gained a reputation for being, I'll say, not the best. But I'm here to argue that you may be misremembering, and they may not be that bad. Skeptical? Well, then let's get to work. Now, before we start, we do need to lay some ground rules. Number one, I will only be talking about games that are a direct tie-in to a movie. For example, I could talk about the Alice games, but since they're not really based on the Alice in Wonderland movie, I'm not going to count them. Plus, if I could count every Star Wars game, this conversation would be over pretty quick. Then, number two, we're only going to be talking about feature films in this video. I could include TV shows, but let's just keep things simple. And number three, a game only counts as a movie game if the movie came out before the game. While there have been tons of games that have been turned into movies, that's a conversation for another time. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Now, the two most popular reasons that I've heard for why people absolutely hate these games are that they deviate from the source material too much, and or that they're not very original, and they feel like they're just pushed out to make a few dollars. I will address both of those points in this video. The fact that they deviate from the source material may not be a bad thing. Stick with me here. Take X-Men Origins Wolverine, for example. Terrible movie, but dare I say, fantastic game. Adding storylines and characters can really help a game improve on a terrible plot like X-Men Wolverine, or sometimes even improve on an already great one like Spider-Man 2. Now, some games actually take that a step further and serve as a sequel to the movie that they represent, like John Carpenter's The Thing, giving us a continuation to a story that we otherwise wouldn't have. Now, guys, don't get me wrong. Some games can absolutely take this way too far, like Die Hard Arcade, which has absolutely nothing to do with Die Hard. But since most movies just don't have enough action sequences or plot lines to fill an entire game, sometimes the devs have to get creative and kind of add their own elements to make up some space, and I think that's okay. Alright guys, before you blow up my comments box, let me just clarify. I am not saying that all movie games are good. Trust me, I have played my fair share of stinkers. I've played Transformers and Iron Man, and yes, I've even played the worst game of all time, E.T. for the Atari 2600. Which, by the way, since I brought it up, let's have a quick conversation about that. We'll step off to the side, let's talk about that for a minute, and then we'll come back to this. Alright guys, we as a whole really need to stop referring to E.T. as the worst game ever made. When it was released, E.T.'s fatal flaw was that it was confusing and nobody knew how to play it. Once you figure out how it works, it becomes a pretty standard Atari game. And this idea that it single-handedly caused the gaming crash of '83 is just not true. No single game has the power to topple an entire industry. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't care for the game either, but calling it the worst game ever made is just false. But with that being said, sorry, got a little distracted, got off on a tangent. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Now, like I was saying, I won't deny that there are some bad movie games out there. I'm just saying that a lot of them have plenty of redeeming qualities, and some of them are legitimate gems. Just try to keep an open mind. I mean, I look at it this way. There are a ton of terrible games that have nothing to do with a movie franchise. You don't write off all video games because of them, do you? No, you don't. Seems like a double standard. Alright, now moving on to that second complaint that I normally hear.
All movie games are the same. Make a generic platformer and push it out as quickly as possible just to make a quick buck.
Now, yes, that is true a lot of the time. Until it isn't. While yes, there are a metric ton of action platformers that are just kind of slapped with a license and pumped out to make some money, there are a lot of exceptions. For example, Rockstar decided to make the Warriors game a sort of beat-em-up, which resulted in an absolutely phenomenal game. And THQ decided to make Cars a JRPG. Oh, no wait, that was a racing game. And don't even get me started on the Lego games. Yeah, I'm including the Lego games. What of it? They follow the plot closer than most legitimate movie games. I'm counting them. I mean, they're one of the most unique game series of all time, and, I'm not too proud to admit, a ton of fun. Now, some movie games can even set a precedent that future games can emulate, like the aforementioned Spider-Man 2, which laid down a blueprint that every Spider-Man game since has copied, including Insomniac's recent addition to the series. GoldenEye completely revolutionized the first-person shooter genre, and Dune 2 could absolutely be considered a grandfather to every modern RTS game. Some of the most influential games of all time have been movie games. And while that may not always be apparent, if you look closely, their impact really can't be denied. And frankly, they deserve more than just being cast aside and dismissed just because they share a name with a movie. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for my argument. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I got you thinking. Now, while I am in no way some movie game fanboy, I have had some good times with these games, so I want to talk about them in a video. And who knows, maybe next time you think of movie games, instead of your mind immediately going to Finding Nemo, maybe you'll start thinking about games like The Warriors, or Super Star Wars, the Lego games, Spider-Man games, Die Hard Trilogy, things like that. Now, if some of you are still not convinced, I do have one more point to make. It's a point that is so solid, none of you will be able to deny it. And that point is Shrek 2.